And joining us now on the debate, Ratna Omidvar. She's the president of the Maytree Foundation. Cheryl Tilak Singh, member of the graduate program in Immigration and Settlement Studies at Ryerson University. Nathan Shan is executive director of CASA, that's the Council of Agencies Serving South Asians. And Stephen Wong is the founder of Living Realty. And you've all come in today to talk to us about Markham, Ontario, which is a fascinating experiment in that which we are about to discuss. What's up with Markham? Michael, if we can, here's the first graphic of the evening. Here is the visible minority population in Markham going back to 1996, then 01, and then 06. And we can see back in 1996, the total was towards 50%. Toronto, the city of Toronto, the 416 is at about 50. So Markham wasn't quite there. Chinese being just about 25%, South Asian being less than 10%. Go to 2001, the visible minority population is up over 50%. A little less than a third, the Chinese make up. South Asians now over 10%. And 2006, the last year for which census figures are available, the visible minority population in Markham, Ontario, which everybody who's been in this province a long time thinks of one way, should stop thinking of it that way. This is almost two-thirds of the population visible minorities, and of course, in the 4 years since then, 5 years since then, it would be larger. Chinese population, a third now. South Asian population, almost 20%. Let us start by, Nathan will give us, we'll get you to get us started first. I want to get a sense about your relationship with Markham. Where are you from originally?
From within the world or from within
Canada?
The
world. Where are you from originally? Where were you born?
I was born in Sri Lanka, in the northern east of
When did you come to Canada?
At the age of 16.
16.
Yeah.
And when did Markham become a part of your upbringing?
Well, I moved to Markham in 2003, so I've probably been around 25 years, 24.
You're 24. Why'd you move there?
Well, Markham is, the Tamil community has been very transient. For Tamils, they were fleeing a war situation. So for us, moving from, St. Denis Drive in downtown to Scarborough and then finding a permanency in a place where you can buy a home, Markham became a good place for people to buy a home. New developments were happening, and so it became almost like our search for permanency kind of ends in places like Markham, Brampton, and so on.
Gotcha. You thought it was a good place when you moved there.
Yeah.
You've been there for X number of years now.
I've been there for 7 years. I actually moved recently to Scarborough, back to Scarborough, but I've been there for 7 years.
And how was it?
It was good. It was good. Actually, I ran for public office as a school board trustee, and I got elected there as well. And it served the community for 4 years as a trustee for South Markham. It's an amazing community. There's a lot of potential. There's a lot of promise in the community. But I think we'll have a lot of time talking about how do we tap that promise and how do we make sure we don't
neglect. We surely will. This is just the introductions here. Okay, Stephen, your business. You're in the real estate business.
Yep.
When did you first get to Markham?
Oh, I started my business in North York, 1980. And since 82, I moved my head office to Markham, and it's been there for 28 years.
Okay. Where did life start for you?
Hong Kong. I was born in Hong Kong.
Came
to
here
Canada
when?
in 1969. So it's been here for a long time.
You sure have.
Yeah.
Okay. Markham, does it work?
It works for me. I live in Markham.
You live there? You work there?
I work there.
You have a business? You employ how many people there?
In Markham?
Yeah.
I think I employ in the 2 offices around in Markham. I think we employ over 250 people.
250.
That's correct.
So you're moving a lot of houses.
In Markham, yes.
Yeah, in Markham,
yes,
you're doing okay.
Yes.
Why does it work in Markham?
Well, Markham, it's when I first came to Toronto in '69, the Chinese population, the new immigrants, really not that much, but they're mainly in downtown Toronto. And then starting in the late '70s, early '80s, I start migrating them to the bedroom community of Scarborough. And then gradually, starting in the '90s, start moving up, to Markham. And ever since, didn't stop, just keep going.
Cheryl, why don't you give us the academic overview of here? Because here, these are 2 stories of which sound fairly typical, actually, of how people start somewhere else, end up there.
Right.
Give us the academic overview of what we're hearing.
Okay, well, what used to happen is that when a lot of newcomers would come into the city of Toronto, in the past, a lot of them were settling in the sort of downtown core. What we've been seeing with more affluent immigrants coming into the city of Toronto and with a lot more sort of urban sprawl, better housing stock, is that people are now have a wider range of choices and are choosing to settle in places outside of the city in suburbs such as Markham.
So they don't have to start the traditional immigrant way, I guess, is to find a poor neighborhood downtown, or
Right.
lower income, I guess they say nowadays.
Exactly.
Now they go right to Markham and they call up Stephen and they get a nice house.
Yeah, they have a greater range of choices so that we can no longer think about immigrants as simply being lower income.
Gotcha. Ratna, how does this work as far as you can tell?
Well, I think of Markham as, in a sense, as fast-forward urban Canada. It's today where many other communities may well be. It's got a growing middle class, so you have to think of it as a model of success. If you extrapolate the national statistics, most of the residents, 85% of them, will have taken out citizenship after a certain time. If you extrapolate success of immigrant children based on ethnic backgrounds, then you have to assume that a lot of those Chinese and South Asian kids are in fact going to university. So I think in the medium and the long term, Markham is a very successful model. We may have some discussions about the short term, what needs to maybe work better, you know, the whole issue of not being as cohesive maybe as other downtown communities.
I'm going to follow up on that. I'm going to follow, but so far, if I understand your overview, I know people like this expression. From 35,000 feet up, this looks like a kind of a community that works. It's
absolutely
affluent, and people are doing reasonably well.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, now we're going to land the plane. We're going to get onto the ground, and we're going to see if, in fact, it lives up to all of the expectations that we're hearing about. Because all week long we've been talking about immigration and its discontents, and this idea that multiculturalism, while it's a wonderful idea, may not be working 100% wonderfully well everywhere. And I want to know, Nathan, why don't you get us started on this? How integrated a place is Markham? As in, do the different ethnic groups actually have anything to do with each other?
Well, I think the word integration is a loaded word. You know, when you say integration, are we asking people to fit in what is already existing, or are we asking people to shape what exists around them, right? So I think currently what I see is that there is a fitting in process of what exists. There's not been a lot of systemic changes. There's been progress, but not necessarily enough to, you know, to accommodate or include a lot of the diversity that exists in Markham.
Okay,
so,
what does that mean exactly? Spit it out.
So for example, the arts, the kind of arts program they afford, the school system, are they changing fast enough to accommodate the diversity in terms of, you know, celebrating diversity beyond the superficial nature of, you know, sari, samosas, and so on and so forth? Our experience of different ethnic groups valued, our sports and recreation being diversified, the community space accessible. Are we having enough conversation about access and equity? You know, we talk about equity because not everybody is starting off the same level playing field. How do we change that? And this conversation about equity is very rare in areas in the 905, Markham, Richmond Hill, Thornhill, Vaughan. So what I'm saying is we have a starting benefit of affluency and people buying homes, and, you know, the kind of second generations or people who have gone through neighborhoods in Toronto buying houses. But this is not going to last if some of the systemic issues are not taken.
Let me follow that up with Stephen. You know, we many different community groups living in Markham, but I think it's an open question to ask whether or not they are living within their own enclaves or whether they're actually mixing with each other. What's your experience on that?
Well, multiculturalism works with a certain degree of success among first-generation immigrants. What I'm seeing in Markham is starting to develop is the second and third generation start growing up, actually residing where their parent lives, where they grew up. So that, I don't think they have any problem migrating, because I don't see them seeing themselves as Chinese, South Asians, or any ethnic group.
How do they see themselves?
See themselves as Canadian. They grew up with the rest of the Canadian population. They basically migrated. They just see themselves as part of this community.
Not hyphenated?
No, not at all. So multiculturalism, I think, is perfect because it only applies to the first generation, if you ask my opinion. Okay, well, because, you know, I mean, other than that, you know, my kids, I don't see, they see themselves as Chinese.
Cheryl, what about it? Can I ask you to speak to that phenomenon where some
Sure.
people say multiculturalism, you know, it's there insofar as there's lots of different ethnicities in Markham, but they don't mix. They all live in their own worlds.
Well, I think it's really tempting to use concepts like ethnic enclaves or even integration without recognizing that our understandings of those concepts have changed over time. So if we're thinking about ethnic enclaves, that, you know, there's a temptation to sort of think that groups aren't interacting with members of the other group, but to recognize that there's a lot of strength initially for people to be able to acquire great economic opportunities. And if those communities, as is the case in Markham, are allowing people to move upward and to attain good positions, rather than what we tend to think about in terms of ethnic enclaves, where it might be limiting people's opportunities, then ethnic enclaves are, you know, are something where we should see some of the strength in terms of ethnic businesses. And then in terms of integration, in the past, particularly through multiculturalism policy, the inclination was to think about the relationship between immigrant groups, newcomers, minorities, and moving into the dominant group, right? And now that even becomes harder within Toronto to think about what is the dominant group within Toronto. So I think having a more sort of fluid understanding of what integration is really important. So in Markham, yeah, we're seeing a lot of success in terms of economic integration, and I think that's really valuable.
Let me follow up with Ratna on that, because, you know, I don't know the answer to this, that's why I'm asking you. You guys are the experts here, but the stories one hears go like this. Yes, there is a vibrant Chinese community, but everybody buys houses from Stephen. All of his clients, all of his employees are all from the Chinese community. You don't see Tamils buying houses from Stephen. You don't see necessarily Chinese people shopping at South Asian corner store, that kind of thing. So the questions get asked, yes, there's multiculturalism, but do the cultures mix? What's the answer?
Stephen, I would say to you, it was ever thus.
It was ever thus?
It was ever thus. If you look at the history of immigrant communities to Canada, to Toronto, the Irish settled in Cabbagetown, the Italians settled in Kensington, the Jewish community still has significant enclaves in North Toronto. What's different about Markham is, one, the scope and scale of the community.
It's 300,000 people.
Yeah, and two, the fact that they are visible minorities. So maybe we look at them with a different light. I think there is no doubt that as Stephen is saying, integration happens in the second generation. It sometimes happens, hopefully, in the first generation. I do think, given who we are as a country and who we are as a community, we need to think about ways of compressing natural timeframes. If integration happens in 20 years, it's in our interest to make it happen in 10, 5, 3, 2. So faster, better, quicker, cheaper. That's my mantra.
Stephen.
Well, on a more local commercial side, what I can see is, to give you a good example, when I first involved in building, designing, and developing a big shopping mall called Pacific Mall in Markham, it was intended for immigrants, Chinese, mainly designed for their population. But then, subsequent to that, we found out that now we have about 25 to close to 30% of the daily shoppers are non-Chinese. Now,
but does that mean 75% of your shoppers are Chinese?
That's right, but don't forget.
But that's who it was designed for.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, on top of that, if you compare to what happened in downtown Toronto, like when I first came, they actually introduced Chinese on the road signs. They actually made out Chinese, translated name for Dundas Street, for instance.
In Chinatown, downtown.
Exactly. But I don't see that happening in Markham.
You don't see?
I don't see a Chinese translation on the street name in Markham, which means the people have adapted. I live in Markham. English road signs is perfectly normal, so perfectly acceptable.
You're not making an argument that the signs should be in Chinese.
No,
you're saying
I'm
they're not
saying
needed.
they are, even the first generation Chinese living in Markham are well adapted to the Canadian world.
Okay, we got a new guest here and I want to put him to work. Kenneth Ng is chairman of the Federation of Chinese Canadians in Markham. Kenneth, nice to have you on the program, first of all. Glad you could join us. We've been talking about how well integrated the various ethnic communities are in Markham. And we've been hearing, we showed some statistics off the top of the program that Chinese Canadians now make up about a third of the population of Markham. And we're trying to understand, whether that third of the population is mixing with everybody else, or as Ratna has told us, sticks to its own knitting, if I can use that expression. What's your experience on that?
Well, Chinese is not homogeneous, just like any, we cannot really say they're Chinese. Even in Markham, even though there are a big portion of Chinese are immigrants, there are many that are actually first and second and third generation Chinese as well. And Chinese, they come from Hong Kong, they come from England. And basically, it's just part of the progression, as Ratna said, takes time. And of course, some of the people that come, they would like to stick for comfort level, naturally. And some want to integrate quickly. Some can integrate quickly because of if they come from Hong Kong many years of under the British rule, they might have some adaptation already and the language problems.
It's interesting that you say it's not a monolithic community, because some people who've lived in this country for a long time might see an Asian face and say, okay, all the same community, but you've got Mandarin speaking, you've got Cantonese, there are differences, aren't there?
Certainly, there are differences, and on the outside you cannot tell, but certainly many of us can tell, and among the Chinese as well, it's difficult sometimes to integrate among themselves as well too, because certainly the language is not common, and the second generation, sometimes they can hardly speak any Chinese at all.
Understood. You wanted to follow up.
Yeah, I think we need to also shift the conversation to see why is this seen as a wrong thing when communities of the same faith or same language tend to hang out together, organize around there.
Let's be careful here. Let me just interrupt long enough to say I'm not sure we're saying it's wrong. Yeah. I think we just want to have the right impression of what's going on, and the impression we have of multiculturalism is all of these cultures all working together, and I want to know if that's true.
I'm not saying you are, because I've worked in school system, I've worked with police, I've worked in the systems where they tend to see, cafeteria politics, it's systematically seen as a wrong thing to do. But I think this is part of a settlement process. People feel comfortable in their own communities first because the acceptance levels are higher. They can practice their businesses faster, they can practice their skills faster, their skills are more transferable in their own languages to begin with. Young people who are facing marginalization in school tend to find the support within their own communities, so tend to feel a sense of belonging. So I would actually urge to rethink even having signs in different languages, a piece of belonging, that every community feels like they belong to this country. If things are written up in different languages, it's not just I cannot read English, but my language being valued as a potential language that could be seen on a board.
So you'd like to see the signs in other languages besides English?
Whichever languages are predominant, to be accepting of different cultures and reflecting that in our environment makes us feel better belonging. A sense of belonging comes, if that comes at a neighborhood level, school level, at the country level, then we all feel part of that particular nation building.
Okay, Stephen, let me do this with you. We talked about a large development, the Pacific Mall that you were talking about, but how about just houses? What percentage of the people that you sell houses to do you think are Chinese Canadians?
A big majority, especially the new houses.
Big
newly
majority?
built.
So we're talking, what, 2/3?
Well, I don't have statistics here with me, but a lot of the big new houses that are being built in recent years, a lot of them are being bought by Asian and Chinese, especially.
Now, Rat, is there anything wrong with the fact that this man's got a business that employs lots of people, most of whom I think are Chinese, and sells mostly to Chinese people?
He's a good businessman. I think there's nothing wrong with that. But I do think that we need to look at some of the natural incentives that we can put in place. And I think about the things that draw us together as a community, regardless of which place in the world we come from. I think about our libraries, they're natural gathering places. I think about hockey fields and sports fields. When your kids are playing around a hockey field together, parents are integrating. I also think there are some really interesting examples of cultural responsiveness in Markham. The Yi Hong Center for Geriatric Care, which is, renowned in Canada as an institutional response to culturally sensitive elder care. It's little known that it also has beds for South Asians.
Can I give you the other side of the coin? Mm-hmm. Fairchild TV hosted a political all-candidates debate for I guess it was the last municipal election, just passed in November. The only candidates they invited when they did their debate were candidates who could speak Cantonese. So never mind, they didn't invite English speaking. I gather they didn't invite Mandarin speaking candidates either. So some people are going to look at that and they're going to say, this is unfair. You've favored one group at the expense of others, and that's not what we're supposed to be about.
And yet you look at the results. Markham City Council has 4 visible minority councillors out of 12, which is way better than what Toronto does in terms of percentages. So I think Markham is going sort of incrementally down some interesting paths and writing its own story and its own narrative. I think we have to discuss the place of public institutions as the central place that draw people together and build a community. And I like the idea of, as Nathan was saying, ownership. You can live in a community, but you can be emotionally attached to a place far away. But when you have ownership of something, you know, your street gets together and you say we need a new playground or we need a new speed bump, and you all work together, that's the kind of thing that embeds you. That's the glue of a community.
But Cheryl, let me get you on this. I guess the suspicion is that that kind of thing doesn't happen very much, and more of what happens, in fact, is Stephen selling houses only within the Chinese, not only, overwhelmingly within the Chinese community, and that's, I'm not sure that's the multiculturalism people have in mind when they talk about it. I think when they talk about it, they think about everybody getting together, which is not this.
Well, I think we can, you know, acknowledge the fact that what's happening in Markham is a success story, and there's a lot of positive things. On the other hand, I would be concerned, and I have heard anecdotally about people who've been interested in purchasing a home in Markham, and you know, being told, well, you know, we were kind of hoping for a Chinese buyer, right? So what happens then to the opportunity for other communities to come in here and into Markham and to draw off of some of those benefits, right? So I don't think it's going to be about exclusion. I think it's about opening up the doors of Markham to a broader range of people, perhaps, so that other people can draw off of some of the strengths that are happening there.
Now, Ken, if that happens, if you've got a Chinese homeowner who wants to sell, and somebody comes to the door who looks like Nathan instead of like Stephen, and the person says, well, we kind of really wanted to sell it to somebody who looked more like Stephen than Nathan, that's a problem, isn't it?
There's a problem, but I don't think that's a reality.
That's not the reality.
No, the reality is people want to sell the house.
Yes.
They want to sell, make the money, and or for some reason move away. That person selling could be a Caucasian, could be a black person selling, could be happen to be some more Chinese buyers, and they think it's giving the money and so on. But that's a possibility, but I don't think anybody will specifically, because when they leave, they're going to leave anyway. That's realities. That's part of business as well. There are many, many choices. I can give example of like a grocery store. There's a foodie a grocery store on Highway 7 McCowan. A lot of Chinese going because it's successful right now. But at the same time, Philippine, Chinese, black, and everybody else going there because of good value, good price as well. But again, they get to know more because of the promotion that they have and so on. And
Cheryl, your anecdote has spurred some conversation on this side of the table. Go ahead, Radna, and then Nathan.
I think business will go where the market is. I think Stephen will sell houses to anyone who will buy his product. And the question is his product going to be good enough to meet the differing needs of different customers?
But that flies, yes, but that flies in the face of prejudice, which we know sometimes ignores business realities because it's prejudiced.
Well, you know, anecdotes are sometimes worth telling because they paint a narrative. In the town of Markham, the banks were the first institutions to lower their counters, their bank counters, to match the more typical height of local residents. The most popular Indian restaurant in Markham, by the way, is Chinese, and it serves Chinese food made specially for our taste buds. And no matter which day you go, there's a line around the block. So there is some very interesting give and take. I think one of the more interesting indicators of mixing up, which we haven't talked about, is intermarriage. I mean, it is, I think, one of the most interesting indicators. And if you take a look again at national statistics, it's on the rise.
Okay, hold off on that, because Nathan wanted to comment on this, and then we'll come back to that.
Well, definitely. I mean, these communities, we're talking about South Asian communities, Asian communities, are pretty smart business folks. And I don't think they would be risking. In fact, after they establish their own market, they would be liaising with other communities. I'm sure Stephen is working with non-Chinese real estate agents and always networking. Our Tamil restaurants are selling products in other communities. They're owning other restaurants like, you know, pubs and Firkins and so on. So Tim Hortons employees have become employers and managers. So it's not necessarily these communities, and hiring diverse groups as well. So I think on a superficial level, it might look like these communities are not interacting, but they are cultural. And for me to pick a particular Tamil agent to sell a house could mean language for my parents to understand, cultural factors, what number the houses matters, which way the house faces matters to me, whether it faces south or north. And those kind of minute details might throw somebody else off when we are trying to find those kind of things. So I think there's some sort of a need for a particular person to serve. Whether doctors are chosen because of the language stuff, cultural understanding, and so on.
Okay, let's
so
follow
I think
up on
that's important to consider as well.
Sure. I like this idea of following up on intermarriage because if the communities are in fact coming together, marriages would be a good place where you would see it happening. You got anything on that? Any statistics on that?
Not so much marriages, but even if we think about marriages linked to our social networks, right? Because a little bit of what we're talking about in terms of how businesses get established or how people might think about where to go to purchase groceries that are affordable, it's through our networks, right? And if our networks are limited to our communities, no matter how we divide them up, because we've acknowledged that communities themselves are very diverse, right? So if you're limiting that to people who speak your own language or people who immigrated at the same time that you are or who are second generation, then that sometimes limits opportunity. So I think looking at networks, which would also sort of feed into what you're talking about in terms of marriage, then that's who you know, right? So to a certain extent, as I think we're all agreeing, looking at those institutions or the places that bring us into contact with people who might be outside of our everyday networks, allow us to do something that's maybe innovative or to bring about some change.
Stephen, in the sales of your houses, do you notice that the couples who come to the door are more mixed marriages today than, say, they were 5 or 10 years ago?
Well, first of all, I want to clarify one point. A real estate agent, when they sell houses, they either find a client who wants to buy it or they represent the owner who wants to sell the house.
Sure.
In recent years in Markham, there's been more people in the Chinese real estate side of the real estate agent have a tendency to represent more seller than more buyers, because the people have bought many years ago, now is ready to sell. And we don't really have any choice who we want to sell it to. Disregard what the public try to dissect this thing, but we really don't have any choice. Whoever comes with the highest money, highest dollars, they end up buying it. It's not the color of the skin that dictates. It's how deep their pocket is. So, in that regard, I personally think, it's a myth. All right, the community really do not have any way to determine who is going to live in that community.
Okay, Ratna, you wanted to say on intermarriage.
Well, I think it's something we have to look at. It is encouraging. The national statistics are on a rise. I don't know what they are broken down community by community. I think some of the most interesting intermixing of this kind happens in universities and not in let's say, local communities like Markham. But the groundwork, the groundwork in a community around institutions, public spaces, is the Hindu temple in Markham ready to celebrate Chinese New Year, and is the Chinese temple in Markham ready to celebrate Diwali? Those would be the pathways on the way to integration that I think would be interesting to see whether we can make that happen.
What are the answers to those two questions?
Well, certainly, I think there are things to clarify, certainly. One is, for public institutions, we have to make the effort, because it's for the public, for open all and so on. For business, it's a different story, whatever goes for them. Certainly, government is doing a great job, is encouraging the availability for the parks for all the children to go to, and as well to also provide some activity where all the communities are invited to certain celebrations as well. Yeah. But in terms of the progression in that, where many community leaders and also the government have been working together, trying to help that along. But the most important, because we live in a multicultural society, we encourage each other to celebrate their multicultural, their heritage, but at the same time to share that with others when they are ready. Like the Chinese, been around for a long time, as we mentioned, there are many different variations of Chinese and how much so-called Chinese you are and so on. And as the community get ready, it's welcome trying to expand, just like business trying to sell to others, expand out to invite others to celebrate. Many people now celebrate Chinese New Year. They participate in many Chinese New Year celebrations.
Even if they're not Chinese?
Even if they're not Chinese, because they're interested in it, or their friends bring them in, or business.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Steve?
One of the way to see how much intermarriage or different ethnic background, being within the same family, so to speak, go to any restaurants. You're going to see Chinese with all of a sudden one person who is typically non-Chinese, but it's the same family. They come from, for the meal, they're all together. And it's very typical. It's getting very common in any restaurants, whether Chinese or not. So, in Markham, I'm talking about. And it's something that we're happy to see. I mean, that's really good.
Ethan?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we are seeing a lot of, sometimes it's not seen outside as an interracial marriage, but, within South Asian, there are so many different communities as well. India itself has more than 100 languages, right? So technically, there could be mixed races for what we know. We're just not seeing it in certain ways. What I wanted to bring, just slightly getting away into a policy level, because that's what I'm interested in. Recently, the 2 Asian article motion was tried to be passed in Markham. Apparently, the only 3 Asian councillors were the only ones supporting the motion to have
the motion was on what?
Motion to ask the Maclean's magazine to have a comprehensive apology, just like Toronto. And so you have a system here where every councillor is willing to celebrate Chinese New Year, but when it came to a motion, only the 3 Asian councillors were the ones stuck at the end to only push the motion. The others did not. So
what did you take from that?
Those are places where I think we need a lot more education at system level to see how much respect do we give to communities when they come with a particular need. How are they being received? Do they feel included after this process? I've talked to one of the councillors who was bringing the motion, and the kind of morale of a councillor suffers. I was the only trustee of color out of the 12 trustees in York Region District School Board last term. And only youngest person. So this year, fortunately, there are 4 councillors, four trustees who got elected. So there's change coming. But at the same time, we need to be able to look at policy level change. Multiculturalism cannot be tokenistic. It has to be at every level, and that's something we need to do.
Let me follow up on a question to Cheryl with that. Yes, there are, I think, there's 4 Asian councillors out of the 12 in Markham, right? Chinese are 1/3 of the population, and they have 1/3 of the seats on council. So you would argue that that's representative. Yeah. Is there a danger in them seeing themselves as only being there to represent the interests of Chinese Canadians in Markham as opposed to the interests of the entire community?
Not necessarily, because I think that if somebody decides to run for public office, they're committed to representing everybody.
That's the question, though, are they?
I think if somebody's sincerely going into politics, they're going to be looking for the interests of their whole community, particularly if they want to be reelected, right? So they're going to be looking down the road. And, somebody who's deciding to run for public office is doing what is seen in terms of classic theories of integration and assimilation. Probably the greatest indicator of being integrated is running for public office, right? You are, and to borrow your language, definitely feeling like you have a sense of belonging and that you want to give back then and participate as an active citizen. So I think all of these things would suggest then that people wouldn't feel like they had to bias someone from their own particular community over another community.
I wonder, Ratna, you wonder whether the Chinese Canadians on Markham Council, I'm not alleging this, I'm just asking the question, whether they see themselves as, in particular, representing Chinese Canadians in Markham in the same way that maybe the white Anglo-Saxon members of that council, and there are a bunch, whether they feel that they have to represent the interests of so-called old Markham more than they do of the new residents of Markham. I don't know. I'm throwing it out there. What do you think?
I'm sure. I don't know the city councillors, so I can't speak from any depth of personal knowledge about them. But I'm pretty sure, given the demographics of Markham, that they have a particular sensitivity and connection to immigrants, regardless where they come from. Now, they may be more Chinese or more South Asians. I'm with Cheryl. If they want to get elected, they better look after the whole community. But there can be no doubt that with those 4 people on City Council, they are representing back to the citizenry of Markham, the people who live in Markham, in a different way. So I think they're important and significant symbols of change. Change is always slow. Markham is, I think, to some extent leading the pace. But it's not an either or, Steve.
Mm-hmm.
They're both. If they're good counselors, they're both, representing the interest of Chinese immigrants and Indian immigrants and people who've lived there forever. So that's.
And the mayor's last name is Scarpitti.
Scarpitti.
He's Italian. Okay, go ahead.
Well, during the last municipal elections, obviously I've been approached by a lot of candidates to solicit our support. Two things I've observed. They don't treat me as Chinese because whatever promotional material they send to me are in English. I've not yet seen a councillor trying to solicit my support by giving me a Chinese literature written in Chinese. So I don't think, I personally do not believe that's what they are targeting. But whatever is good for the Chinese population, I assume should be good for the rest of the population. How do you try to bring something good just for a selected group of citizens in a community? I don't see that being in a public office that's even possible.
And that's the last word on our discussion today. I want to thank everybody for coming in tonight and helping us with part 3 of our series on immigration and its discontents. Ratna Omidvar on the right-hand side of the screen from the Maitrey Foundation. On the left-hand side of the picture there, Nathan Shan from the Council of Agencies Serving South Asians. And Kenneth Ng, the Federation of Chinese Canadians in Markham. And on the other side of the table, Stephen Wong, Living Realty and Real Estate Brokerage, and Cheryl Tilak Singh, Ryerson University's graduate program in Immigration and Settlement Studies. Thanks so much, everybody. Great to have you on tonight.
Thank you.